Hey board gamers, how's it going? It's Mike Cassie here with another episode of the Weirdwood Manor board game vlog. Thanks for joining me. So in this episode, I'm going to continue to take a deeper dive into trying to flesh out the mechanics of the 2 or possibly 3 ideas that I'm coming back to the guys with to pitch again. We're going to continue looking at the shifting Bookropolis, but we're going to look at it through a different lens this particular episode. And that is through the lens of narrative. Now, one of the things that came to the top in the initial pitch meetings was that the guys really also liked the other idea, number 2, which was the Bookropolis quests, which was a really narrative-heavy driven game. And the question arose, is there any way for us to take a little bit of narrative and tie it into one of the other 2 ideas that they liked? And so that's what I'm going to look at now. So let's get started. I've been trying to think about this. And one idea I've come up with is I really conceptually want this to be where that narrative interaction is something that hopefully happens maybe on every player's turn, and it's got to be quick and not take a lot of time, but still somehow kind of bring all the players together to some degree to feel like they're sharing in that experience together. And so one of the thoughts I had was some sort of simple mechanic about players drafting or acquiring cards that would represent kind of like story points or events or little even mini choose your own adventure kind of sequences, something that could be really quick to happen. So got some paper down in front of me again, like always, and I'm going to kind of work through this. So let's talk through this together. Well, I'm going to talk to you, but I hope, maybe you're chattering away and say, Mike, what the hell are you doing? You should be doing this. So maybe there's still a bit of a dialogue going on, even though I can't hear you right now. So the idea was the players would kind of draft these cards. And, I originally thought you get a card, it's got some kind of text on it about like a story point, and then what do they do with that? And so what I like the idea is a couple things. Actually, maybe 3 things. I love the idea of giving players some kind of choice in terms of what story event they're potentially going to use or engage in. So the idea that there's an element of choice here for the players, a feeling of some agency, both in the number of cards, but then that choice also potentially in even the options on each card. So perhaps there's this, then I had this idea of like, well, okay, so here's the story flavor text here, and maybe they've got a couple different choices, one choice here, another choice here. So nothing unusual at this point, something you've seen in a lot of other games. But then the other thing I thought about was the 2 other things that I wanted to sort of see in this was the idea that from that the players still felt that there was some continuity or connectivity between all of these individual little events. That it wasn't just a one and done. I do this little event, I got something, I chose something, it's done. I wanted to feel like there was some integration of all these choices for all the players, keeping in mind that the Shifting Bookropolis, at least currently, is a cooperative, at least a cooperative or maybe a semi-cooperative experience. So I had this idea that in order to do that these cards, instead of the player just getting the card and doing it and discarding it, that maybe the players would start to take these cards somehow and they would draft them into their hand. So they've always got multiple cards maybe to choose from on their turn, and there's some way at some point at which they can play one of these cards. And when they play these cards, I had the idea of basically playing these cards in kind of like a timeline. So basically a row of cards down on the table in front of all the players that sort of shows the players what everyone's chosen, and that hopefully maybe these choices somehow, they have a narrative connection or a thematic connection. So you kind of get this history of events they chose. And so that's kind of interesting. But then I kind of wanted to say, well, if you're doing that, well, that's kind of cool. You see what everyone's put down, and maybe it sort of roughly tells a really loose story, or at least a history of events. What could this do mechanically for the players? So the idea here then I had was, when putting these down, that what if instead, when these got put down with the choice, and let's say there were a couple choices that, I'm going to actually draw this a little bit larger. Let's say there were a couple choices on these cards. So here's the narrative text, and let's make a choice up top here and a choice down below. And the reason here is I thought, what if these choices had some kind of element to them in terms of when you play it, you're going to get that thing or something's going to happen for that specific choice. But when you put it down on the board next to whatever the previous event was another player played, so here's a second card that gets played, that if these they have these connections connect in a particular fashion, the player who plays this card is going to get something else or something special. So this could be a scenario where these little boxes each are like, for example, if I blow these boxes up here, that they might be about getting like extra resources in the game. So maybe some of these are coins if there's gold in the game, or maybe they're magic if there's magic in the game, or could be some other rewards, knowledge. Again, it's the Bookropolis, so books are going to play a role, so maybe they get books or knowledge. But basically, these have different resources, and perhaps when you play a card, if you pair up to the same resource, so if I pair up to magic here, that I get a magic. And so now there's this idea of the players trying to chain these events with a view to trying to match up symbols potentially. And there's different ways this could happen. It could be if you pair both of these, you get that thing. It could be if you pair them, you get two of that thing, whereas normally you would just get one from one box. Or it could even be if you pair them, you get the common thing here and you get whatever is in the box on the other side. So basically some kind of reward system for putting these in a particular time. And then I had this idea, so what's happening here is that you've got these cards, so we've got choice. Players have cards to choose from in their hand, and they're always kind of weighing what to choose and when to play it. And each of these cards might have a couple choices. And the idea here, if you want to play this choice, the player had wanted to play this card, they're basically just rotating this card 180 degrees to play that at the top. And so they've got some choice between the two items. So this idea that the players have choice in their hand and potentially choices on each card when they play them down. So what we've covered off here is one of the things I wanted was choice for the players. I wanted an idea that there was kind of a narrative sort of link or make it feel like players care about the other choices that other players make. So we've kind of got this, I'll say, player engagement. So that kind of takes care of this idea that now this sequencing of events has some impact. It affects what you might play, and so you're keeping an eye on this as well. And then the third thing I wanted in doing this is ideally wanted this to sort of be, I guess, have this sequence also sort of contribute to the overall kind of game state or the narrative or the thematic or scenario that's kind of being played. So if we come back to the shifting Bookropolis, there's this idea that in the shifting Bookropolis here with all the different rings in the center royal reading room here, that there was going to be some evil fey creature on the board somehow, and that he was causing havoc and trying to move to the center of the board, and the players might lose the game if that happens. So then I thought, well, potentially this deck of cards, these events, could have sort of event points that have an impact on what happens in the game. So for example, one of these cards could give the player a choice that when they play it, it might allow them to move the fey creature back away from the royal reading room, or it might do something that helps them beyond just sort of resource gathering mechanic, that it sort of integrates with the actual overarching scenario and sort of the goals that the players are trying to achieve. So that was kind of the thematic angle of this. The other side of that too is, again, thinking about sort of the thematic side of this is, it could be that these little boxes have some tie into that as well. So let's just say, for example, these boxes could be resource related, or some of them could be resource related. But it could also be that some of these boxes are somehow related to the goal of the game. So just imagine instead the icon here is the Fey monster, for example. And that maybe if you can play enough of these together during the course of the game and string them together, maybe there's another overarching tie-in about trying to get enough of these boxes linked up to achieve some kind of larger goal in the context of moving the player's goals forward. So, for example, if you can kind of string together enough of the monster icons, which all would be choices about somehow affecting the Fey monster, maybe if you get to a certain threshold of these in the game state, so in this example here, you manage to string 6 of these together, there's some extra bonus or triggers some other cool thing for the player. So that could be how these cards are used. This could potentially be woven in with other more general cards or generic cards that are about resources, assuming that the players need to gather resources for other reasons in the game. And in the current design for the Bookroopolis, potentially gathering magic and knowledge is probably important for a final battle against the creature potentially. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here. This is sort of rough at this point, but again, conceptually the idea is trying to pull in a bit of an aspect of a narrative or some story points and events that kind of, again, give players some choice, but a choice that isn't too heavy and doesn't take too long to resolve, and kind of keeps the other players engaged so it doesn't feel like strictly a solitaire kind of experience and do the event and it's gone. And then also thematically with how these get played, that those potentially can help or maybe even hurt the players collectively as the game goes on. Okay, so there you have it. I've got some ideas down on paper for how to maybe introduce some narrative into idea number 1, the Shifting Bookroopolis, or what might be the Weirdwood Manor version of that design idea. But I still have a lot to do. There's still a lot to flesh out, a lot of details to figure out about how these designs are going to work before I can go back to the guys and sort of repitch them to them. So I'm going to take that offline. I'm going to buckle down, do the rest of that work, and the next time we meet, hopefully you'll get to see those ideas in detail along with the guys and their reaction. So until that time, please like and subscribe. Questions, comments are appreciated. You know the routine, and I always appreciate the support. So until next time, board gamers, keep gaming.